Michael Whitehead from the ANZ, the head of Agri research, joins us again. Michael, how are you today?
Great, Ricky. Always good to talk to you.
Well, and it's been a good harvest. We've seen some positive, indeed, export data from the South Australian government about how China seems to be back on the map again. What are we seeing in terms of the crop coming in and indeed how the markets are opening up?
Absolutely. Look, it's an interesting set of numbers in terms of the crop coming in this year. There are those delays in parts of Australia, particularly in New South Wales and Victoria where the rain affected things. So that's making the numbers and the overall numbers later than usual. In terms of nationally and also South Australia, the numbers continue to look very good. The forecasts are there particularly for a record wheat crop, a record canola crop. Interestingly, a record crop in some of the pulses as well, and everything else still looking reasonably good. Just taking some time for it all to get out of the headers, into the field bins, and for everything to be tallied up.
Yeah, we're yet to see any of the state governments or even peak bodies sort of put a cherry on the top of the harvest and say, yep, we're done, and this is how much there was. So they're clearly working it out, but I guess there'll be an element of on-farm storage is a bit hard to get your handle on as well.
Look, this is really one of the interesting things, and people in the industry talk about this every year. What's going to be the change in the level of on-farm storage? And that's dictated by a few things. How much do producers want to hold back from selling into the market? How much are they happy to sell straight away and take advantage of current prices? For a number of them, it may also be, are they looking at changing into more sheep next year and want to keep some of it back as feed? And so we're really seeing that over the years being something that's building up with less going into some of the central grain areas and staying on farm as well. It's been building up slowly, but still a lot of it is going to port as quickly as it can.
Yeah, and it's something, I guess, it's neither for you and I to tell farmers what to do, but I have seen one of our regulars on our Friday Country Viewpoint program suggesting farmers might want to get it moved on and not hang on to it for too long. But looking at what the industry is doing, there are some workshops being run about how to manage your on-farm storage. It does seem there's an expectation from some peak bodies that there is a lot more storage this year than other years.
Well, there's a few interesting indicators in trying to work out those markets too, and talking, for example, to some of the silo manufacturers and the fact that waiting lists for some of them have blown way out because demand is so strong and it was hard to get materials in during the COVID disruptions. It'd be interesting to see also what the demand is like and the waiting list is like for the big sausage bags going on so many farms to store grain in as well, because in recent years we've absolutely seen that ramp up. One other big thing, I suppose, too, is that as we see farms grow in size and the consolidation of farms and the big grain operations, they are also more likely to have the capacity, the cash flow and the expertise to set up their own on-farm storage as well and build that into their business plan. So that's been a big driver too.
Well, I noticed as well, this is from one of the departments in the states we cover in South Australia, the Trade and Investment Department. I flagged this earlier, some really positive figures, especially they were bullish about the exports to China. I wonder about barley. I think they were stopping going into China. Have I missed a sort of relaxing or that, or is it sneakily sort of finding its way into China?
Look, in terms of different crops going into China, question marks over all of them, but maybe some quiet positivity about it. Canola's the interesting one going into China, and China's been absolutely upfront about wanting to reduce its reliance on soybean imports, but it obviously still has the need for feed as its pig herd comes back after swine fever, and particularly as China opens up, everybody wants to go shopping, go eating again, and use more vegetable oils too. So canola is one where we are seeing really strong signs of imports into China growing. With barley as well, it's one of those ones that's being talked about quietly, hopefully likely to see things flowing back in there. Let's see how the course of 2023 goes.
Well, I certainly bear in mind as we talk about these things and those possible positives, farmers, if they haven't got their hands on seed already, they may be making planting decisions at least at the moment, hoping some rain might come in the proper time during autumn. But are you picking anything up on the seed market in terms of ability to get what farmers are looking for?
It's a really interesting question because the discussion at this time of year, and particularly at a time when costs are high, and whether that's in terms of buying a new header, buying your fertiliser, your other inputs, your pesticides, your fungicides, there had been some thought that maybe farmers had held back a bit and maybe not plant as much as they had for the last few years. On the other hand, anecdotally, I'm definitely hearing from some sources that seed sales have been as strong as ever, that it, in some areas, can be hard to procure seeds. So the signals that we're getting is that a lot of farmers are going hard on getting, hopefully, the fourth great crop in a row.
Well, let's hope that is the case and the weather does its part. But casting our mind back overseas, we talked about China earlier. You've got a report out indicating that there's going to be a lot of interest in Australia from overseas.
Well, look, absolutely. We would all remember back, it seems not that long ago, but 2 or 3 years ago before COVID, when the world was a much smoother place and when we had so much investment focus on Australian agri, whether it was on investing through other vehicles into farmland, whether it was into corporate agriculture as well. What we are now seeing globally is that post so much of the worry about Ukraine and post so much of the COVID disruptions as well, global investors are absolutely looking at ag arguably more than they were before. And they are looking at getting into global ag supply chains. And Australia, with our relatively good production levels, our quality production levels, our low political risk as well, will always be at the front of that. We've seen some recent large announcements as well of purchases by investors into Australian ag. So Australian ag needs to be ready for that action to come back again.
Well, I think you flagged in one report that you've published, was it an irrigated New South Wales farm bought by a Chinese investor? Whereabouts was that?
Look, this was the Gunderline one, which was in the media over the last few weeks or so. And while that is one of a series of things we've seen over the years, and the Canadian investors have been particularly strong, North American investors, and others investing through other vehicles as well. It is just interesting and worth noting that this big Chinese investment is back there again. So clearly the processes for investing into Australian ag are back on board. It's also important to remember that global investors are looking at Australia, but very much so are Australian investors, Australian pension funds, and other Australian ones as well. So ag is definitely right at the front of the radar for them.
And we saw a big boom in regional property prices, I think particularly in regional Victoria, one of our broadcast areas. In the past, I've sort of thought of this topic as they're looking for properties that have got a bit of drought resilience, a bit of drought proofing about them. But is that less an issue now? It's more about they're looking at the infrastructure on the farm to weather whatever the season might be and whatever ends up getting planted or grown on the land.
Look, there's always going to be a range of different drivers for property. You could argue that the biggest driver of Australian property prices is buying the neighbours, that the competition for different parcels of Australian land could be potentially strongest when there is a number of enthusiastic and strong local farming operations who are keen to pick up these pieces of land which border onto their own operations, which consolidate them as well. And it's that growing consolidation of farms by people who are passionate and multi-generational about the industry which are driving things. You're absolutely right. Drought proofing is going to play a big role. The infrastructure as well, whether it's the sheds, whether it's the irrigation, that will play a role as well. So it's a range of those different things which are each going to feed into the property price move.
Well, Michael, always enjoy your insights from the ANZ on the agricultural sector and agribusiness. Thanks for joining us today on Flow. Michael Whitehead from the ANZ.
Thanks very much, Ricky.